2023 regular season began for the Philadelphia Eagles on the road against a New England Patriots team that put up a pretty good fight. And the Eagles were able to eke out a win. And that reinforced Eagles fans' high hopes for the 2023 season. And over the course of the season, Eagles fans had those hopes reinforced by win after win after win, with a fluke loss coming to the New York Jets. But then, after the bye week, things started to take a turn for the worse. And the Eagles dropped 5 of their last 6, including the regular season finale on the road against a New York Giants team that showed up to play when the Eagles did not. And now the Eagles are locked in at the number 5 seed and will take the playoffs on the road. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. The Philadelphia Eagles lost the regular season finale to the New York Giants by a final score of 27-10. And listen, you can write off the second half of this game because the Eagles didn't even bother to put really any of their starters out. Marcus Mariota started for most of the game, started for all of the second half, and the Philadelphia Eagles really just didn't play with any degree of desire to win this game. Because when you actually look at this game, if you look at the first half stats, which was when the starters were out, the Eagles just didn't show up to play. The Eagles had five first downs in the first half. One of them came off of penalties, so they really only had 4 that they actually hard and fought earned. Compare that to the New York Giants, who had 14 first downs in the first half. That's not okay. The New York Giants entered this game 5-11. Take another statistic. The Philadelphia Eagles offense had 102 yards in the first half. The New York Giants offense, again, entering this game 5-11, 272 offensive yards. I don't know what you want me to say here, because the Eagles didn't show up, and I, for a little bit of this game, had half a mind to not do an episode for this, when clearly the team doesn't even care. Jalen Hurts was benched midway through the second quarter. He finished the day 7 for 16 in the passing game for 55 yards. He was sacked twice. He had no touchdowns. The Eagles were actually shut out in the first half entirely. And Jalen Hurts was picked off on his final drive. Jalen Hurts' performance tonight, emblematic really of the entire season. We came into it with high hopes, and at the end, we were let down. Jalen Hurts did run the ball twice for 4 yards. Both of those were on brotherly shoves. The biggest runner in the first half, Kenny Gainwell, 7 carries for 62 yards. Rashad Penny was in the game, 3 carries for 7 yards. The Eagles did rest DeAndre Swift going into this game. He was out of the game with an illness. The Eagles also rested Fletcher Cox on the defensive end of the football. In the receiving game, Quez Watkins, Julio Jones were the leading receivers. Quez Watkins had 3 catches on 5 targets for 29 yards. Julio Jones had 2 catches on 4 targets for 13 yards. A.J. Brown had 1 catch. A.J. Brown also fumbled the ball away, and that came actually on the Eagles' second drive of the game, where the Eagles were able to get into Giants territory, and A.J. Brown, he had the ball stripped out of him. So it was absolutely a frustrating performance by the Eagles starters, and A.J. Brown actually did wind up leaving the game after that fumble due to injury. He did go into the locker room. The takeaway, he went in under his own power. He was not carted off. He was not limping. It was something completely under his own power, so we will see how that pans out through this week. But the Giants came to play. The Giants were able to put up 24 points in the first half. 24 of their 27. They only scored a field goal late in the game, 2 of them being off of runs by Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, over the course of the first half, had 11 carries for 29 yards. And then the other Giants touchdown came off of a Darius Slayton reception. It was for 19 yards. That came towards the end of the second quarter, and that was the final touchdown of the game for the Giants. Tyrod Taylor spent most of the game in as quarterback. He went 15 for 20 in the first half for 229 yards. He was sacked once in the first half, one touchdown, one interception that came at the very end of the first half, where Reed Blankenship was able to pick him off in the end zone after James Bradbury batted the ball away. That showed some signs of life by an Eagles defense that was very dormant throughout the first half. There was really no evidence that the Eagles were going to be able to do anything based off of the first half of this game. And the second half of this game, it was great. There were good things. There were lots of good flashes from some of the players who were farther down on the depth chart. We got to see some more from Britton Covey. We got to see Quez Watkins, Olamide Zaccheaus. We had Marcus Mariota come in, 13 for 20 for 148 yards. Got the Eagles' only touchdown through the air. Mariota was also picked off once. That happened in the first half. There was a lot of good to see from farther down in the depth chart, which I was pleased about, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this game feels like it was treated as if it was a preseason game, and it wasn't. The Eagles were playing for something. The Eagles had a chance to win the NFC East, and they felt like they didn't want to do that. Now, at the end of the day, it wouldn't have mattered because the Dallas Cowboys absolutely demolished the Washington Commanders. Final score in that game was 38-10. So the Eagles would not have won the NFC East even if they had won today's game. So it kind of makes sense to see some of those guys who are farther down on the depth chart get an extra look at them, but it feels like this game was treated like a preseason game, and it wasn't. The Eagles have not been shut out since the Eagles faced off against the Commanders on December 30th, 2018. So we have to go back a few years before the Eagles were shut out of a game entirely, and while this game was not a shutout, the Eagles starters getting sat down for much of the game, including all of the second half, kind of makes it feel like it was a shutout with a little bit of a 30-minute exhibition at the end. This game does not give me any degree of confidence going into the playoffs, and I think that's the biggest takeaway here. Now, there were injuries that were sustained. We had A.J. Brown leave the game, as I alluded to. We also had Sidney Brown, who left the game. Reed Blankenship left the game. Cam Jurgens left the game. So the Eagles were not free of injury in this game, and there's definitely, again, reason why you would sit the starters as you get later into the game and as you realize, you know what, we're probably not coming back from this. But it just kind of stings to see your regular season end with the quietest whisper that you can have. And it especially hurts when you consider the fact that the Eagles were able to hold off the New York Giants just a couple of weeks ago. And Eagles fans certainly hoping that this team would treat it as a get-right game, trying to give some kind of a shot in the arm before the playoffs happen. That shot in the arm did not come from this game, so the Eagles are going to have to look elsewhere for any degree of motivation that they can use to carry them through the playoffs. The Eagles are going to be traveling to Tampa Bay next week to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers won their game this week against the Carolina Panthers. They needed to win in order to have the NFC South title, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were only able to score 9 points on the worst team in the league this season. So the Eagles should, if they're worth their salt, be able to manhandle that team. But it doesn't give me any degree of confidence based off of the results of today's game. Now, again, a couple of good things to take away, and again, I'm really just focusing on the first half because that was when the Eagles starters were playing. Kenny Gainwell, longest run of the first half was 32 yards. Kenny Gainwell hasn't had as many looks as somebody like DeAndre Swift has had, but he did a good job during the course of this game. Additionally, the interception at the end of the first half by Reed Blankenship was, again, some heads-up play that really we've been hoping to see from an Eagles defense over the course of this season. maybe the Eagles defense will be able to use that going forward. And again, some of the guys who were farther down on the roster got some good looks. We got to see more out of players like Olamide Zaccheaus, who went 2 for 4 on the game for 20 yards. Quez Watkins, by the end of the game, had 8 receptions on 11 targets for 93 yards and the lone Eagles touchdown. We got to see Britton Covey get 3 catches on 5 targets for 35 yards. We got to see some really good stuff out of guys who don't normally get to see regular season playtime. And I think that is going to be an important takeaway as the Eagles start to look towards the future and look towards which players we can afford to keep around, which players we can't, who needs to be moved around, etc. But the Eagles do have a playoff run to get through before they get to any degree of what's next for this team as we move forward into future seasons. But the Eagles have a playoff run to get through, and who knows how long that playoff run will last. Because the Eagles really, in the course of this game, did nothing to convince fans that they have what it takes to live up to the high expectations that were present even just a few weeks ago. It is very hard to believe that at one point in time, this team was 10-1 and had the top record in the NFL. And now this team has gone on to an 11-6 finish, and it feels like we're limping into the playoffs. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your big takeaways about this game? I know I wrote off a lot of the second half in terms of team performance, but there's definitely some good things about that, so definitely feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you so much for supporting the Bird's Nest podcast throughout the course of this entire regular season. This was our first regular season in operation, and we would not be able to do it without you, without your support. So thank you so much for taking the time and tuning in to the live streams, to the podcast episodes. It really means a lot. And I'll still be here over the course of the playoff run, however long that takes, and into the Eagles offseason, whenever that comes, and into seasons in the future. So definitely keep it locked here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Bird's Nest podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Amazon Podcasts, and Spotify. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below, as well as at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.